some New Year's resolutions with hopefully more golf. So, Simon, what have we seen this year? If we start at the top end of the bag.
Yeah. I think one of the things that's been noticeable over the last few years is how much closer everything's gotten together in terms of performance, and it's really little nuances that have made the difference between a brand or another, or one model and another performing. Certainly with the driver heads, as they've got bigger, and the tech in the heads, take Stealth this year saving 40% of face weight. Those sort of changes and the movements in where the centre of gravity sits have made a bigger and bigger difference to how they perform relative to, they're much more nuanced relative to someone's swing. So, the further you move the weight away from the face, potentially the more differential of where that centre of gravity, swing line and target line can be, and therefore bigger discrepancy in performance model to model. So, whilst design-wise they've all got close, they're all pushing the design limits as much as they can, they're actually seeing some slightly bigger differentials in performance than we have done in the past. One of the heads that actually a lot of people, the one that we did the most drivers of, are the Stealth family. So you got the very noticeable from the red face, and that's the bit where they saved the most weight.
So how's that face been generally received? Because when we saw that product back end of last year, it was a bit of a Marmite moment. We didn't really know if the customer would accept the change in colour or the change in sound, because it's quite a thick face compared to titanium.
Yeah, it's much thicker. 4 or 5 times thicker, I think. But I think that the sound is fine, because actually a lot of heads have become, by being bigger, they've become a little bit tinier in terms of sound. And with all the different metals and titaniums and things, actually the note of the heads is getting quite loud. You go back to FT5 kind of time period, that was really quite a loud head. And some of the noises, especially indoors, you notice it more, but we're getting a little bit harsh. And so actually the composite face from a sound point of view was quite popular. I kind of dampened it down, made it feel a bit more solid. I think the colour of the face was only really noticeable in the higher lofts. So it wasn't something that there were a few people who were affected by it, didn't want to see that differential in face colour. But actually having the contrast here, you go back to when TaylorMade did the white crown, it gave an alignment mark, and so actually keeping some form of alignment marking along that top line was quite popular.
And of course, my Stealth, you could change some of the colours of the crown and the sole. Could you change the face colour? I think you could.
Face colour, yeah, you could. It was only available kind of direct to consumer online, but you could change the face colour. You could change the sort of matte or gloss on the crown. You could change some of the kind of the highlight colours on the sole, and the kind of the frame colour around that back edge there as well. If I can sort of show you where the polished bit, the shiny bit is here. Obviously the crown stayed either matte or polished, but this section here you could change the colouring of as well, for an upcharge. So, but yeah, I think as a product across the board, a lot of people sort of said, "Oh, the Stealth, that wasn't that good this year, was it?" Whereas actually, speaking to TaylorMade about it, those who are fitting got great results out of it and did very well with it. Those who weren't necessarily fitting had a poorer performance level out of it. And I think what's shown with this head, particularly between, in our kind of percentages on sales and top sellers are across the different models, was that if you used the loft centre of gravity position to dial in the performance to someone, the ball speeds were very good out of it across the board. You really could dial them in, and actually what a lot of people liked about this, the Plus series head, is you could actually get quite a lot of feedback for where you'd struck it, and that was one of the things people were concerned about with the composite face. So all around a really strong performer.
Guys and girls watching, I'm producing live at the same time as well, so I'm trying to keep an eye on everything. If there's any issues with video or audio, just drop us a note in the comment section. And indeed, if you have any questions about any of the products we're running through, if you just joined us, we're just basically running through a product review of what's performed and what has performed in the studio this year, ranking first, second and third. So any questions about any products? If you have any questions about products coming out, there are some questions we can and can't answer. But generally speaking, by the end of January, early February, most new products will be out. But there will be some new arrivals from Ping and Strixon, certainly within the first half of January.
TaylorMade, yeah. By mid-January, we'll have a few of them. Yeah. Yeah, we just can't talk about many of them until about the fourth. So I guess second and third with the drivers. So the Stealth series was the top, and the second and third. Second with the 425, the Pings, and then the third, the Rogue ST series from Callaway. I think your Ping always popular with drivers, always very successful because of their forgiveness and their stability off centre, always very, very good. And that's something that's retained.
I've got to say that I would say probably the best driver I've ever had was the G400. It wasn't the longest driver, but my word, it was the straightest. I mean, I felt like I could do a Happy Gilmore and still find a fairway. Regrettably, the morning of a trip to on a family holiday, I took the driver head off, and I noticed a crack on the heel. So I scurried off to the Precision Golf workshop, picked up a G425 head, and don't get me, it was the 410.
410, yeah.
410. I was very happy with that driver, but it was never the longest. I was always, a good drive for me is up with Simon. I was consistently behind him, so.
Now I'm back in the gym, you better get used to that.
Yeah, but so certainly the new model from Ping, I'm very, very excited to try. I did switch to a Callaway Maverick Sub-Zero purely for ball speed, but that's when I realised that this old man needs moment of inertia in his drive head. Anything further away from slightly off-centre, for me, as a 6 handicapper, it really felt like the face shut down or open. So the off-centre strikes with my Maverick Sub-Zero were awful. I felt like I could get away with pretty much anything with that 400, and hopefully Ping has got something in store for me.
Yeah, I mean, the 425 wasn't necessarily the longest head, and Alan, I will reference that question in a moment about the Stealth. The Ping series, the drivers, they rarely claim to be the longest, but they generally always claim to be best across the face, and that's certainly something where they have been very, very good. Similarly, actually, in the Max series, I mean, Callaway with the Rogue ST, the LS was consistently very low spin, but not necessarily as consistently higher ball speed. When it was good, it was very good, but a little bit more hit and miss. But again, the Max and the Max D were very stable and good for a little bit more launch. And actually, that's something that a lot of players need, is a little bit of help with the flighting of them. So I think that's really where the Stealth probably won out a little bit more through being slightly, relative to the Ping, slightly lower spin, a little bit stronger ball on terms of run out distance. The Ping was then very good for consistency across the face, and the Callaway was very, very close behind, and percentage-wise was 0.2% behind the Ping in terms of sales. So you've seen both products that are coming out, and all three of them are coming out next year. And I think certainly the more limited time with the TaylorMade, but I think both Ping and Callaway, I think potentially be very strong next year.
Any drivers this year that you felt have taken a step back in terms of, I wouldn't say reverse engineering, it's being very, very sceptical of me, or rather cynical, but we do see that one of the products can be absolutely phenomenal, and then the next generation is a bit meh, and then the generation after that is back to where the previous model was.
I think I don't think any of them have taken a step back. I just think others have taken a bigger step forward. I think one of the things in the driver category is, had the TSR series Titleist been in the lineup the whole year, they could well have been, if not top, very close to. I think that they only launched in September, October time, so they've been very, very strong. I think it's more a question of how. I think what we're seeing is how many brands make a jump forward versus how many that kind of maintain. I think that's really, for me, where I think, from what I've seen of and tested with the Callaway product, we've only had limited time with each, but the Callaway product looks very strong next year relative to this year, which was quite flat relative to last year. So it's more whether any of them find a little extra performance. So Titleist found a lot of performance this year. So I don't think any product's worse than it was than the previous generation. Some just haven't necessarily made as much of a performance gain in certain areas as others. And I'll very quickly go. Alan Hopkins said, my concern is that a composite face head will eventually crack under pressure more so than, say, I assume by normal a titanium head. I mean, certainly the face, it's not an issue because you've got. I'm trying to think how many layers it was, but you've got so many layers of graphite and composite on that face that structurally is a downside more stable than a very thin titanium. So you can actually do a lot more with the rigidity and the and longevity of that face because you've got so many layers of material there. You also don't get a weld between the metal and the frame in the same way. So the join actually can be a little bit more sturdy. So I've not actually seen a face fail out of that head this year.
But generally speaking, across drivers, certainly this last 5 years, well, certainly from when we started in 2005 to 2015, there were particular models from certain drivers where we were getting failure after failure after failure with the composite bonds breaking, with the crowns cracking. We're seeing less of that these days. I mean, I maybe the last driver that I've seen fail through a manufacturing defect was possibly a sim product. You get the occasional face cave with a fairway where people are really quite steep and trapping the ball between.
Yeah, you're pinching it against the turf. Yeah.
But certainly the returns are much less.
Yeah, I think all the brands across the board have got better at it, but then again, they're now so many generations further on in terms of using different epoxies and resins to bond the bits together. The materials, the composites used now they've developed over the last 10, we've seen it in shafts, developed over the last 10, 15 years to be that much more stable and lighter. So they're all getting better at it. Inevitably, they make thousands, millions of these things. So some are going to fail. Unfortunately, just law of averages. But I think noticeably fewer failures on drivers in particular recently. Yeah.
Lovely, Dave. Merry Christmas, Andrew. Likewise. Let's move on to fairway woods because we're 12 minutes in. We've got quite a bit to get through. We won't keep you too long. Yeah. Some of us at work. Right, okay, so fairway woods, number one, what did we see we sold most of, which model?
So, and I think a lot of this will be down to the adjustable version, but once again, we are into the TaylorMades. And this was tighter. In the drivers, it was 34.5%, 20.5% was first to second. This one with 34% to 26%. So, the TaylorMade, the Stealth series, the Plus in particular, was an absolute bomb. The Plus is the one with the adjustable hosel, and what that one did in particular was it gave the low spin that series and the TaylorMades have always given, but for technically the Verticom's better player's head, the lower spin, stronger flighted head, it was that much more forgiving. And actually across the face the performance was great. It was almost too strong. We did a lot of 16.5 degree heads, or 3 was lofted up just to turn the toe in a bit and get a bit of launch. So, but the ball speed and the spin strength, the consistency of spin as well. I think it was just one of those heads every now and then a brand gets it bang on, and that for me was a head that, if they make any improvements, that I can't see how much more improvement you can get without negatively affecting one of the other bits. So you can make it a bit more playable and get a bit more flight and a bit more spin, but then you lose the shot strength. So that was a standout head this year. To be fair,
without wishing to move back into driver, I did just want to highlight on a question that Al Hopkins, one of our first ever customers, glad you're still with us. We're obviously doing something right, Al. There was a comment, somebody sent me a message about when our big hitter, Matt, was struggling with his smash factor on a long driver head that came in. One of our good friends, Tom Hawley, said that he got some very useful information from a Callaway tour guide that actually it does actually take a long driver face about 500 hits to warm the face up. Then the optimal data is between 500 hits and around 1100 hits. And anywhere between 1100 and 1300 hits, you would expect that face to fail. So there is you can work a driver face in, much like a cricket bat, I guess.
Like the old sock on a cricket ball with a cricket bat.
Yeah.
For those of you that are old enough to remember linseed oil on cricket bats, things like that.
Quick question in terms of swing weights, Paul. Nice to see you. See your face. I can't see your face. Your name. Does the ball strike differ if weight is put in the shaft tip rather than lead tape on the back of an iron head? I think we've got to understand a 6-iron head will weigh in the region of 258 to 263 grams. if you're adding 1 gram of lead tape, it's such a small percentage of the head mass is unlikely to affect CG as much as you would think. I guess you could say that you've got a hot bath, here's a cup of cold water, you're essentially making the bath water colder, but it's all relative to the overall picture.
Yeah, you need to, I think from what we've seen, you need to move about 10 grams or so to start to see any kind of impact whatsoever on that. And even then, it's such a small amount.
But if you are making weight savings from all over the head and repositioning that total weight to create 10 grams or maybe even more in a driver head, that's when you start to see a shift in CG, and that's going to affect launch and spin. So if you're just joining us, guys, we're just running through products for 2022 that we saw in the studio, which worked best for whoever walked in the door. Any questions, please do fire a quick question down in the comments field. We'll try and get through as many as we can. Fairways, so number 2 was...
So number 2 was, I'll just grab both heads, 2 and 3. So 2, actually, again, Ping 425 series, so comprises the Max, the LST and the SFT. I think one of the things that Ping have done very well with their thirds, it's the shallower profile that was good with this. It's, if you're looking at the depth of head, the Ping versus the TaylorMade, it's noticeably that little bit shallower. So when TaylorMade painted the top line, I'm just going to put the lights back on.
We've got a motion sensor in the meeting room, so Bobby the electrician, if you're watching, we need some work, please.
So they put a little line at the top to actually make it look a little shallower. But one of the things, sat down behind the ball, fairway wood is, by description, a club to hit off the ground, off the fairway. The Ping sitting a little shallower and down behind the ball, that gives people a lot of confidence. I think part of the reason as well is that the Ping's lofts are fairly strong. So the 3 wood's at 14.5 and the 5 wood is at 17.5, which is a 4 wood in a lot of other brands models. So using that 17.5 and turning it down a little bit, one, you turn the loft down, you keep the leading edge a little closer to the turf. But it doesn't then close the face. So most of the time we're having loft clubs up to get to that loft, so it closes the face down. But again, also just consistency across the face, Ping, again, very good for that. So the shallower head profile has always been popular, just because it doesn't look quite as aggressive at setup. And then the third place we had the TSI series. So again, TSRs come in and from a flight point of view, strengthened a little bit versus the TSIs, but what Titleist did very well this series, the TSI 2 and 1 in particular, was getting flight, getting a little bit of launch and spin. So the TaylorMade in particular is great for distance because it's low spin, but that makes it sometimes harder to launch. So the Titleist 1, very traditional look, but good for maintaining a little bit of ball flight. So
these numbers basically aren't which is the best head, because the best head for one person could be the worst in the world for another. This is purely first, second and third of the numbers of heads we've sold. Well, we started with heads, we're going to work through shafts as well, but the number of heads we've sold in the studio this year, which I guess you could say would represent the greatest number of people those products have fitted and performed for. Yeah,
and it'll fluctuate. Our reps always say to us, what can we do to sell more? And the honest answer is just, if the product works, it sells itself. If the results are there, then the better the product is, the easier it is to either dial it into someone's performance, or the more versatile that performance is. Whether it be having Titleist with the TSIs, the 1, 2 and 3 series, you've got different head shapes and flight options based on someone's performance, so you've got more tools to fit someone into.
So TSI fairways will carry through, won't they?
So the TSI 1 is currently carrying. The TSR 2 and 3 came in. There is a TSR 1 which is launching in January, which is the driver and the fairway wood, and the hybrids are all changing.
Okay,
so that will complete the TSR series.
And TSI hybrid will be replaced, or will they run alongside each other?
TSR, yep. Okay. So all 3 of the models, 1, 2 and 3, are all being updated in January.
Lovely. So actually, Simon and I, we will be going to the PGA show back end of January. First time we will have been there in 3 years for obvious reasons, the COVID.
Yeah.
Looking forward to it. I think there will be a few people that won't be there. I gather some of the big manufacturers, certainly shaft manufacturers, won't be there.
Yeah.
But we have booked a number of meetings with the relevant engineers to try and bring you as much content from the show. So that's something to look forward to.
Yeah, that'll be always last full week in January. So we fly out on the 22nd, and then we're there through the Thursday. So we fly back Thursday evening. So,
and if there's anything you want us to see, anything you want us to showcase whilst we're at the show, if you want me to do a live, just walking around the exhibition hall or on demo day, yeah, happy to please, so to speak.
Question from Dave Hurley about swing weighting. How much difference does getting the swing weight right per iron compared to normal fitted irons? I assume you mean in terms of adjusting rather than the flat line. So off the most places you buy are going to be like a flat, what we call flat line swing weight. So all given within a tolerance the same all the way through. And what progressing it actually does is because the club's moving at different speeds and they're different lengths, statically balancing or kind of flatline them is a static balance and not them in motion. So progressing them and making sure that they're dialed in for each individual iron just means each one will swing the same. It'll feel the same to swing, rather than a 4-iron at D2 and a 9-iron at D2 will actually feel different to swing because the 9-iron will swing lighter. So it really just ensures as much consistency as possible. And to answer Mr. Hopkins, again, more from Mura, yeah, there's a head that just came in the very, very back end of this year, the MC502, which has a bit less offset than the previous model, and then the KM700 is, I say, finally becoming available over here. It's not quite there yet, and they've pretty much already sold out of everything that they're bringing in. So unless you've got something on order, probably looking at mid-year for availability on those. But hopefully some wedges some point this next year as well. Hopefully, I know that was something they were kind of looking at. Yeah, most of them will be doing something very soon.
Excellent. Let's move on to
hybrids.
Hybrids,
yeah,
perfect.
So we'll start to see a trend here in some respects of brands, but the number one selling hybrid this year for us, the G425. So I mean, from a head model, the 410 was such a good head. It was previous model to this was one where we kind of hoped they didn't change it too much. And what the 425 did was ball speed was slightly better. The 410 played well if you hit it like an iron. The 425 is better if you hit it a bit more wood-like. But actually, as a head, the adjustability of the hosel, where you can shift it up and down 1.5 degrees, had a flatter lie setting. That was actually quite a key one for this head, which for stronger players who had a left miss, being able to bring the toe down a little bit, just helped feel more confident it wasn't going to go left. But I think overall performance, ball speed, strength of flight, forgiveness, just a very good all-round head.
So the problem is when manufacturers make such a good product, it's tough for the fitter because they will see certain swing types come in the studio and think, I know exactly what head that guy needs. But the last thing you want is, there is a bit of a theatre in the fitting. You've got to disprove something to prove something right. And the very last thing our fitters would want to do is go straight to a product that they know is so good and not test anything else. But as you said, that's that last year's Ping Hybrid was, I mean, it outsold everything.
Yeah, again, 32.5%, so pretty much a third, and second place was 28, so actually quite close between those two.
But even the 410 was a great.
But even 410, yeah, I mean, almost a bit of a shame was that the 410 didn't run alongside this, because you had the 425 was good for someone who's tended to be best for someone a little shallower through and wanted a more wood-like performance, maybe a slightly stronger flight. The 410 was better if you hit it a bit more like an iron, was slightly more compact in shape and spun a little bit more. So actually, it's almost a bit of a shame that they didn't continue through the year, because then we would have done even more Ping hybrids, because you could use the 410 for one playing style and the 425 for the other. But so just generally good ball speed and strong flight all the way through the bag. All the way through the models with the 425.
Okay, right. Next category.
And then second place with the hybrid.
Apologies.
Were the stealths. The plus less so. We did more of the we want a very standard stealth, being a little more forgiving. The plus with the adjustable hosel, a bit more iron-like, but it was good for higher speed players. Did produce quite a strong trajectory, But again, TaylorMade hybrids have always been very good. Going back to the RBZ series, they've always been good for distance and controlling spin. So, in that kind of 19, 22, 25 degree region, always a strong performer for distance. And then going back to, as like with some of the fairways, that the TSI series, one, weren't drawbars, but also help keep a little bit of spin on. So again, that for someone looking for a slightly softer ball flight, the TSI, particularly TSI2 of the 3 models, is the one we did the most of. Just gave versatility because of the ability to change loft, but it wasn't just a low spin bomb, and that actually in that bit of the bag was really quite key to the strength of performance from the TSIs. So again, hopefully they won't change that too much with the Rs.
Irons.
Irons, yeah. So
certainly something I'm looking forward to changing this year. Had a set of irons for the last 4 years, but there's some great models that have just come out. Some lovely models coming out in January. So obviously Mizuno have had their Mizuno Pro 200 series out for
about a year or so now.
So they'll run for another year. Is that right?
Yeah, they'll run through to September time. So at some point, the back end of 2023. Yeah, and the JPX line, the 923 series, we've had 3 of the heads: the Hot Metal Pro, and the HL, the high launch, and then the 923 Forged and Tour will be in January. Yeah.
But probably one of the most versatile range of heads to turn into a combination set.
I mean, JPX relatively. I mean, the one again, I guess, reason James started with is the Mizuno Pro series were our bestseller this year. I think what particularly, again, taking a couple of the heads here. I mean, we don't do many blades, because they're just really hard to hit. And you've got the 225, which is their kind of hollow body construction, faster face. Looks like a blade, but actually then got a bit of a thicker top line, hollowed out internally, and a little bit of speed from the face there. Beautiful head. Classic, looks like a classic Mizuno blade, which that always helps. But the one I think we sold the most of was the 223, which is this head where that's a little bit of a pad for sounding. But I think the key to the Mizuno performance, one, they do the lighter head for going longer than standard. That helps from a sales numbers point of view. I'm not tall at 6 foot anymore, and the amount of sets we're building longer but don't need a heavy swing weight, the lighter head weight helps. But Mizuno have always had a bit of a gap between the blade, or if you take the MMC version head that had a little bit of a lighter material in the back, was it gave a little bit of perimeter weighting, but there was never much separation from the blade. And then you went to the hot metals or a bigger, chunkier head. With this head, we've got from 7 iron up, got some face tech onto it. So they've introduced a Mizuno Pro, an MP series head, which has some tech, but also with the copper layer they got on it, keeps the softer feel. And that combination in particular, and the softer feel with a bit of ball speed progression, that's just done fantastically this year. Very, very clean look, very, it's just a classy club head. It's been the head we've been wanting from them for a long time. And granted, Mizuno don't necessarily move the quickest on these things, but when they get there, they tend to do a good job with it. And this series, they've done a great job with it. So,
and apparently nothing feels like a Mizuno.
No, and that is the model that's available left-handed as well.
Although I will say that, I mean, I've played around with a few of the models, and for me, again, this is just my personal opinion, I find that a head which has tungsten in it feels quite hard and clicky, which some people love that feeling.
Yeah, and so it's all experiential. Some players like a head that feels fast off the face, and some like the softer sound. From a softer feeling point of view, it's a copper layer on that head, on that series of head, which does dampen that sound down. Our number 2 seller with the Titleist T100 and the 100S, and these guys have got 2 dense tungsten ports in the heel and the toe. But what you get with that, you've got another material in there, and that affects the sound, the way the vibration goes through. They are a harder sounding head. Great for, again, keeping a bit of flight and a bit of spin in the 100, and the 100S is a different construction with a small cavity in the back, and the speed gain off that head was something that was a really pleasant surprise versus the standard 100. So again, you've got a for want of a better phrase, a player's iron with a bit of forgiveness, keeps a little bit of trajectory with the 100, which is, for a lower spin player is great. There aren't that many heads that keep a bit of flight. And then you've got the 100S, which wasn't just a de-lofted 100, it was a completely different construction. And the ball speed gain on the 100S and the stronger flight was really noticeable. So it's quite interesting. The kind of golfers that we tend to see, we're likely to see, pretty more towards a lower handicap end than most outfits would. But the two best-selling irons are two very classic-looking heads. Clean shape, but with some tech, and I think that's something that's been noticeable the last couple of years.
Actually, you raised on a point there of handicap, and one of the biggest misconceptions about the service we offer is actually the higher your handicap, the more shots there are to be saved. So the higher handicap golfers will stand to gain the most. Yeah. The better golfer is more of a refine and refining their game. Still, we will always find, if there are improvements to be made, we'll always find them, but the gains are going to be greater than where there are more shots to be saved.
Yeah, absolutely. You're normally kind of changing a flight window or just making sure the gaps are consistent, fine-tuning, the kind of shot type and flight that someone wants to see, mitigating a small miss, whereas actually you're higher up the handicap scale you go, the more likely someone's going to have something completely wrong in their bag. Playing a 4-iron instead of a hybrid, or having a pitch wedge at 44 degrees and then a 58-degree wedge, so you've got massive gaps. So it's much easier to make bigger improvements proportionally for a high handicap. Sure. Excellent.
Right, we're halfway through today's show.
Third place on the irons, I can't show you, well actually I can, because we actually do have, was the Strix on the ZX series. We only had a left-hand head left. They ran out of stock about a couple of months ago. But the ZX series, the 7 and the 5, and they got the Z Forge, which is the blade, and then the ZX4, which is the bigger kind of super forgiving head. Again, just very, very strong performing heads, really clean, simple lineup.
The only reason
well-made Japanese head.
The only reason why ZX7 didn't come out top is because they discontinued it several months ago. I reckon the ZX7 would have come out top as the best-selling individual model, had there been more stock from when did they call time on the heads?
Call time on the heads end of the last quarter. I mean, probably 2-3 months back at least.
So whilst there may not have been a huge amount in it, with them withdrawing the ZX7 and 5, it meant that certainly for us, the Mizuno Pro 223 probably pipped them to the post. Yeah,
I mean, you look at the numbers, the Woods, the top seller is 34.5%, 34.2, 32.5, and the irons are 12.5, 12.5, 11.5, 10.5. So it's a much, much tighter bunch set of numbers on the irons. And then wedges isn't going to be a massive surprise. The number one selling model of wedge
camera switch
is, funnily enough, Vokey. SM9, the versatility with the amount of sole shapes and grinds. You go from the S grind, F grind, M grind, T grind, K grind, low grind, K, D grind. You've got so many options within that series that you can find 99% of the time you can find a head and a grind that's going to work with someone, and it's got the strongest branding of anything. I mean, they're so well used on tour. It's such a well-backed wedge from many people that have played them over the years and been comfortable with them and like them, and just a solid performing product, really strongly designed, and there's such a heritage to them that there's just a lot of options with them.
And Tool Chrome was probably the most popular finish. I mean, they do a jet black.
Yeah, do a jet black and a brushed steel, which is like a darker chrome, and then the raw. So again, you've got a variety of finishes, huge amounts of variations on what you can do with the loft and the bounce, and even with that, for us, being able to manipulate the bounce through a little bit of grinding as well. Just very, very versatile, and so such a strong product from a brand point of view, and therefore people's kind of trust in the product as well. I think it's very, very, very strong. In Ping with the Glide 4s were second place. So the one difference with the Glides is they've got that little bit of weight saving in the back, so a little bit of perimeter weighting, proven to be very good in wet weather with that sort of pearlescent finish, kind of beading the moisture off, so good in wet conditions. One of the other benefits of this head is the Glides we can get lighter than standard. So again, wedges Irons, there are very few that go lighter to allow you to build longer and not make them like a sledgehammer. But in wedges, Mizuno used to do them. It would be great if they did them again. But currently, in order to, if we were building an inch longer than standard, we would straight to a ping, because that pad in the back is actually also, it's a weight. So they go from half a gram up to about 10 grams, so maybe even slightly more. So there's a lot of versatility in balance and weighting setup that we can go to with the pings.
Interesting test that I think it was My Golf Spy did a few years ago, where they compared the launch and spin rate for probably 10 or 12 different wedges in wet and dry conditions, and the results were actually quite startling. Startling because some of the wedges that you would assume performed really, really well were shocking. I mean, there was up to a couple of thousand revs in between wet and dry. And the ping glide, it was the 3.0, so I'm not sure how the 4.0 compares to the 3.0, but it was a couple of hundred revs, wet and dry. So that is such vital information to know for golfers of all levels, because, for goodness sake, if you've got a wet turf, wet ball, wet wedge face, dry your face, because at any level you're gonna really help your performance and not get that shooter.
Yeah, less likely to get the distance variations. Yeah, absolutely. It's like worn faces. It's when on wedges you can play a
Sorry guys, I didn't switch the camera back, so you've been looking at Simon for the last minute. Unlucky.
Any wedge shot off a dry fairway is going to create a lot of spin. It's when you get grass in between the ball and the face. There's the light again. Grass between the ball and the face, and then a bit of moisture. Bear with me one moment. That's then where
we need a runner.
Yeah, that's where you're going to see the tail off in spin. So that's why out of a fairway in summer it can be fine. Then you get a dewy day, or you go into a bit of rough, and you get that bomber. The worn face, just the groove doesn't cut through to the ball quite as well. So that's when you're going to see it. Finalise on the wedges. The third place wedge was the TaylorMade, the middle grind 3.0. So with the face that rusts up, they went with some raised bits between the grooves, which did get a better consistency of spin. And I think it's one of the things this year that I wouldn't say skewed the figures, but Callaway didn't have any wedges for a while this year. So the Jaws wedge has always been very strong, and the current series I think is going to be very strong through this year. So I expect to see them up there in the reckoning this time. The grind shapes are really nice, but the TaylorMade, and the versatility of the grind shapes they've got is good. Head weights aren't too bad on them as well, and actually quite a few people quite liked having that rusty face almost as a bit of an alignment aid. But it doesn't hurt when you've got Rory and Tiger using these wedges, and Tiger with his own grind. But those are in third place again. The proportionate splits were 22.5% on the Vokey, just under 14 with the Ping, and 0.1 of a difference between the Ping and the TaylorMade. So behind the Vokey, very, 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 very tight. A couple of questions just to go back to Titleist offer a forged version overseas on the Vokeys. They have done in Japan in the past what they call a cold forged, but that hasn't ever been available in Europe. I don't even think really in the US. It was pretty much an Asia-only model. But there are very few actual forged wedges. So Mizuno heads are forged, the Callaways are forged, the TaylorMades are forged, but actually the Vokeys are a soft casting, which most people would assume they'd be forged. But actually they're not. They're just a soft cast metal, same as the Pings. They have done in Asia. And one other question from Tony Rook. Can you explain the reason for offset on a club? What's the benefit and why the different offset angles on different brands? So offset, essentially what it does is, offset is the distance between the front edge of the hosel and the leading edge. So the more offset there is, the further back from that leading edge of the hosel the face is going to get. So what it does, one is we align up the front of the hosel with the toe. So the more offset you've got, the more you've got to toe it in to get them lined up. So you naturally close the face a little bit. It also gives a little bit more time for the toe to square up. So it's something that partly visually over the years people got comfortable with that offset, and it's sort of been associated with forgiveness, so there's a bit of a mental comfort blanket there. But technically, a little more time for the face to rotate, a little more time for the toe to square up. It also, by putting the centre of gravity further back from the hosel, it gives that more time to, it rotates underneath it a little more, helps a bit of flight. So there are some really sort of good sort of physical reasons for doing it. Where there's more tungsten in the sole and different materials used, centre of gravity going more towards the toe, we're seeing less offset than we used to. And certainly one of the tour players we've worked with for a while, he rather likes offset, so he says it's a bit of a shame that there isn't as much offset as there used to be on certain heads. But a lot of it is the more offset, more time to square the toe up, and slightly higher flight. So
PTO, here we go.
Putters. Putters have been a bit of an issue from a stock point of view on a couple of the brands this year. So, for example, Scotty Cameron this last year have been heavily reduced on stock. So I think we've done less with them than we would have done had we had any stock to sell. I think from April through to September, October, we had a sum total of about 18 putters that we could sell.
And we're quite a large account.
And we're quite a large account. So yeah, there was certainly restrictions on that front, but the best-selling model was the even roll, the ER2V, the mid blade. So what we'll see actually out of a couple of the models, second place was also an even roll with the mallet there, and third place